Fenton, CEO of GoLocal. Next to me is Cha-Ching, the money man, Gary Sasse, fresh off of some exotic something during 4th of July weekend involved with yachts and helicopters and things like that. Things that the super rich do, the rest of us read about and watch on television. Mr. Moneyman, we had a fun story broke yesterday. Rhode Island, under then General Treasurer Gina Raimondo, invested in lots of hedge funds. One of them was Elliott Management, managed by Paul Singer, one of the richest men in the world.
Well, I think he's about the 327th richest man in the world.
He's actually 822 on Forbes' list. He's 822. He's worth $2.9 billion. He is a very aggressive hedge fund manager, and he had a hedge on a Chinese loan to the famous soccer club, AC Milan. I believe David Beckham played for that club, and Messi might have played for that club once upon a time. And the Chinese bank defaulted on the monies from Mr. Singer's Elliott Management Group, and now owns a premier soccer team, and thus the retirees of the state of Rhode Island now have an interest in an Italian soccer club. Is that what we're supposed to be doing with our retirees?
It depends. If we give our retirees a trip to Italy to stop at Milan's soccer game, go down the coast, go to Florence and Rome, then that would be a form of retirement benefit. But it's a much, we joke about that, but it's really kind of comical in a serious way. When Governor Raimondo was General Treasurer, she diverted about $1 billion of the pension assets into I think it was 14 different hedge funds. And the idea was to hedge, against changes in the market on the upside, where more traditional money managers, particularly of public pension funds, would look at index funds, lower yield, but much safer, hedge or protect against volatility, protect against inflation, have a better record, frankly, than hedge funds. Hedge funds, you pay large fees up front, whether they produce a penny or not in many cases. And so it was a calculated gamble. The gamble did not work out, as witnessed not by what I say, but what the new General Treasurer said. He basically came in and said, after reviewing the state's pension portfolio, it was time to get back to the basics. He recommended, I forget the exact number, but about $600 million that were invested in hedge funds be sold, be converted back into more traditional, more secure, less costly investments. The hedge funds proved to be a gamble that did not succeed. There were some that made money, there were some that lost money, but on the whole, it was a risky proposition, and I'm glad to see we're getting out of the hedge fund business. We never should have been in the hedge fund business to begin with. The other thing about hedge funds, this is more of a political observation than an economic observation. A lot of the very big hedge funds have all kinds of political tentacles that go to places that you don't even know about. Just for example, Paul Singer, who I have some experience with since he was a major supporter of Marco Rubio, a major funder for Marco Rubio, is on the board of the Manhattan Institute.
Right.
Manhattan Institute is an organization that I depend upon. It's conservative, but it's a very, work is well done, conservative think tank. Through that think tank relationship, you develop relationships with people in public life. You can give them awards that the Institute gives out if you think it's...
Gina Raimondo won one of those awards.
Well, no, if that's appropriate. And so you got all, as they would say before World War I started, all these entangling alliances when you get to the hedge fund business. And in government, it is so important to try to be transparent and accountable about those alliances, that when you get involved with most hedge funds, you're getting into an area, frankly, where government is the younger child in that discussion.
Well, Paul Singer is a big player in a lot of different games. He was the 7th largest political donor in the 2016 cycle, giving $26 million to leading Republican efforts, was the funder through a series of different entities of the so-called Trump dossier, which some link to being the impetus for the Mueller investigation. So he's got his hands, and then he turned around once Trump got elected and gave Trump's inaugural committee $1 million to help fund the Trump inauguration. So this is about as wily a complex. The one we'll be reporting on tomorrow, it's been reported on before, but not in the context of Rhode Island, is he once, in a 15-year effort to secure some money that the government of Argentina owed him, was able to take control of the Argentine government-owned tall ship and seized it, including its entire crew. So he's a creative, industrious man, and it seems a little bizarre that that's where we're putting our retirees' funds. This is a story that's not going to go away, and I think there's a lot more to come out of it.
Right. You know, the story is that why did we put $1 billion into hedge funds, period? You know, I understand the technical reasons that we wanted to hedge against downturns in the market, and this was an upside, so it would help us
But
better.
we were one of the highest percentage of states to invest in hedge funds. I think we got as high as 18%. It was in the top 3 or 4.
It was 18, but it was about 14, 15%, my memory, but you might be right.
And clearly, fellow Democratic General Treasurer, Seth Magaziner, thought better of it, and within a fairly short period of time, move funds out of it. Cal's pension fund, the state of California's retirees pension fund, has, I think, totally left hedge funds. I guess hedge funds become right sooner or later because there's a downturn at some point, but you lose a lot of upside investing in hedge funds, and can you ever get back what the fees cost structure is?
No, it's I think it's clear that investing the amount that we did in hedge funds was not fiscally prudent. Now, you might have bought 1 or 2 hedge funds. There's nothing bad about hedge funds per se, but if you look at the hedge funds that we bought, you look at the fees that we were paid, we dove into the swimming pool head first, and there was no water in the swimming pool.
Right.
And so don't give all hedge funds a bad name. You want to diversify portfolios, but you want to do it with reason and balance. And of a portfolio at that time that was probably about $7.5 billion, we took 14% of it. We took $1 billion and put it into these hedge funds with fees that were unnecessary, where if we had kept the money in indexed funds with very low risk, not as good a return, we've probably done almost as well, if not better.
How does this set the stage for, we saw a chaotic week for Democrats last week with these somewhat crazy endorsements. I mean, no matter what your ideology is or things like that, endorsing John Carnevale and Gregory Acciardo and, I don't know what kind of Democrat wants to endorse a Trump supporter over an incumbent female Democrat, but it was as chaotic a week. You know what, it reminded me of the week in which John Holmes failed to file his papers.
Oh,
and Ron Makeley ended up getting the nomination, sort of default, and ended up winning a congressional seat. It was just bedlam.
But I have 2 observations on that. One is not as bad as other people's. If you believe, like I do, and very few people I think believe this today, that you want both political parties to be a big tent, then there's no reason why the Democrat Party can't give an endorsement to a business type that has moderate to conservative views about government, and there's no reason, as we Republicans used to do in the past, to give an endorsement to a John Chafee, who has a more moderate, and in some cases more liberal view. So, and that happens. So,
and where does John Carnevale fit into that? Is that the biggest tent?
That's my big. That's a striped tent. But that was my second point. So when people, right away get politically exercised, because everybody that is supported by the party doesn't meet, their litmus test. I say, well, that's kind of funny. If you want to draw more voters in, you want a Big Ten party. So I dismiss a little bit of that is just identity politics, extremism on both the right and left. I don't think extremism is really healthy for the system. The second point I want to make, which deals more directly with Carnevale, I don't know what role the speaker played, but the folklore, and it's probably more than folklore around here for a long time, is that the speaker controlled that process.
Yeah.
And I think the reforms need to be considered within I'll stick with the Democratic Party here, on where the leadership comes, how the endorsement process is, how open and transparent the endorsement process is. I'm less concerned about the outcome than the process that was used. And I think it's probably time that we move away, that the speaker has an unbelievable power when the speaker, which has always been the case in all our memories, is from the majority party and it can completely control the majority party, that gives additional power to the legislative branch versus the executive branch. It makes it easy for the speaker to maintain discipline in his caucus. It makes it harder for reformers to get a vote on line item veto. It took generations to get a vote on separation of powers. And so I think that's really the story here, is who should chair the political party, how open the endorsement process should be, and the third point, which a lot of the political correcties won't agree with me on, it ought to be as open as possible to encourage broad types of participation in both parties.
Well, listen, I don't think there's any doubt about it. I was, first and foremost, I think there's always a line in the sand, and it seems like the Carnevale and Gregochardo endorsements, one on the Senate side and one on the House side, were call it a new low. But simultaneously, it was an opportunity for the governor to speak out about it. And by the way, nothing stops Alan Fung or Patricia Morgan about talking about the absurdity of a John Carnevale who's now under charges, 3, I think, felony charges. Perjury and forced out of office just a year and a half ago. That this is out of bounds. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. This is, if we're going to have a modern Rhode Island, we're not going to reelect. We're not going to bring back John Carnevale's of the world.
Well, as you said, a very interesting thing, because in a lot of places, the governor of whatever party the governor is from is in a lot of ways the titular head of the party, and it brings back into a sharper contrast the real executive-legislative relationship, which I'm most, from a government perspective, I'm most interested in, that there be strong executive, and that if you can make the executive stronger, somebody has to sacrifice, because you can just get 100 pounds in a 100-pound bag.
Yeah.
It'll probably come at the expense of some legislative prerogatives.
So definitely an interesting time. Matt Brown had a big week, seemed to get a lot of oxygen, clearly defined himself as a reform-minded progressive, spoke out consistently. Can he make a move in the Democratic primary? Can he move successfully to the left of her and get enough momentum to make this a horse race?
I can't handicap a Democratic, primary, but I look at the support that the governor has and the way she's melded together various Democratic constituent groups. So, she has the women's group, she has organized labor, she has groups that normally were progressive. There are a lot of progressives up there that scream they're progressives in both the speaker's line.
Yeah.
And so, she, has done a good job in, bringing the various interests in the Democratic Party under her banner. And I think, Matt will have a tough time. I don't see it quite as analogous as some people do, is that this is a Sanders versus Hillary thing. We're talking about local politics here. We're talking about it. Hillary had no incumbent powers in the state of Rhode Island. When the governor runs for office, whether the governor is successful or unsuccessful, he or she, brings a little clout with him because of the powers of incumbency. So I think Matt has a very difficult road to hoe.
I'll beg to differ just a tad.
Please do.
Obviously not from the standpoint of the office, but Hillary Clinton beat Barack Obama in 2008 by about 10 or 15 points, the Clintons were the darlings of Rhode Island for 10 or 15, 20 years in electoral politics here. They did have some level of stature and momentum. They were, I think there were only 2 elected officials that supported publicly Hillary Clinton. One was Aaron Ruggenberg, and one was Sheehan.
They supported, you mean Bernie or Hillary?
Sanders, excuse me, in the Democratic primary. You know, the speaker, the congressional delegation, the mayor, the governor were all for Hillary Clinton. The Clintons came in here numerous times. I think Hillary Clinton came in once. Bill Clinton came in 2 or 3 times. But they didn't anticipate that there is a bigger schism in the Democratic Party in this state than maybe anticipated.
Well, I think there's definitely a schism. You know, the nomination battles, demonstrated that. But at the same time, there are organized interest groups that have a direct, stake, which are not quite the same. Planned Parenthood, nationally can support candidate A or candidate B. That has less impact on the local, that the local chapter of that organization supporting candidate A, and using its phones and its foot soldiers and its donations on the ground. So I think the dynamic is a little bit different. But you're right. One of the great uncertainty about this election, both parties in the primary, and I think also in the general election, will be who comes out to vote. And if a lot of people who come out to vote, who were part of the resistance to Trump, that could help map. But I just see their organizations in the state not, being turned on. I see individuals being turned on, and I think politics is a team game, so it seems the teams are lining up in one place.
The Republicans had to enjoy the week. They weren't talking about Rentgate or some crazy Trump thing. Did this give a week of opportunity for Cranston Mayor Alan Fung or House Minority Leader Patricia Morgan to regain some footing and jumpstart their campaigns post the 4th of July week?
Well, I won't say they lost footing, because I don't know what they had to regain. At this point, there was nothing exciting or new that came from those campaigns. The most exciting thing was the independent candidate, former Republican Trillo's boat hitting a rock, winning a shot.
Yeah, right. It was a rocky week. It was a rocky week for Joe Trillo.
But he's going to laugh all the way to the bank because he got some more free publicity.
Absolutely.
His name out there. I didn't see any game changer last week on either side.
Let's jump over. Money Magazine did an analysis of the fastest growing jobs in each state. And in Rhode Island, the fastest growing job is a manufacturing position and pays about $35,000 a year. In contrast, Massachusetts' fastest growing job was a statistician paying almost $100,000 a year. And in Connecticut, which we seem to celebrate their lackluster economy, their fastest growing job was aerospace engineer at about $113,000 a year. You've talked about this issue quite a bit. It seemed to reaffirm really the narrative that you've raised as a concern about Rhode Island's economy, that we may be creating some jobs in this economy. We're not creating the kinds of jobs that are going to create long-term impact, long-term wealth, and redefine Rhode Island's economy.
We're not dealing with our fundamental and structural issues. We are growing jobs. The current employment situation in the state is solid. When you have 4.1% unemployment, that's solid. So you should look askance at the solid job performance. At the same time, you have to look at some other things. Your first point is compared to what? The economy is doing better. The Trump tax cuts before that, the Obama years had modest growth. And so all states came out of the recession growing jobs.
Right.
And we were one of those states. So the way I measure it is, well, how are we doing compared to other people? Well, I've just, over the last 5-year period, I try to jump over political terms, so I had a little more balance. From January of 2013, we've grown. Our job market has grown by 6.2%. Not shabby. The United States has grown by 9.6%. Looks a little shabbier. Massachusetts has grown by 1%. So while we've had solid growth, we haven't had as much growth. Then the second question is not just the quantity, but the quality of jobs. And we have some real, structural, problems. Education, declining population growth of 1/10 of 1% a year. And the future projections are not rosy. If you look at the state's own 5-year forecast through 2022, over the next 5 years, they project that our jobs will grow about less than 0.5% a year, about 0.4% a year. Our labor force will grow by just about 0.1% a year. And so those are real problems of stagnation. The other problem is the quality. So these are factors that we're not addressing. We could talk about what we're doing. We're doing some positive things, but these real problems are not being addressed. And then you got the mixed job question. So the figures that you cite were the average type of job in Massachusetts, which was a statistician, paid almost $100,000, and our job was somebody that worked in molding fiberglass. That paid about $35,000. Keep in mind, for a family of 4 to meet a reasonable, not even reasonable, but the minimal cost of living standard in Rhode Island, you need an income about $55,000. So when a job pays $35,000, that tells you about two families, two income families. Okay, but so why does something like that happen? Because we have created some good jobs in the business and the professional sector, which pay, on average, about the ones we've created since the recession, about $67,000. That's good. But at the same time, the second fastest growing sector is accommodations and food. And those jobs average paying $21,000 a year. And then you look at what we've lost in information technology, we're not growing as quick. We've lost 10,000 manufacturing jobs since the recession. So you see yourself losing a lot of jobs that paid in the 50 to 60,000 range, which you needed to maintain a family of 4, and we are substituting some good jobs, but not as many as other states, and we're substituting a lot more low-paying jobs. Well, that gets back to dealing with some of the structural issues that I mentioned. And so while it's nice to give all these tax incentives and tax credits out, and I have to admit that tax incentives and tax credits are used by most states. They're really a core of any kind of economic development strategy. There are certain issues that jump out where we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars, and I don't feel we have the right answers on accountability and the transparency of the tax, what they're being used to pay for.
Gosh, you saw a protest last week from labor folks on, a job that's got a lot of questions to it and no oversight.
And let me give you one example. I may be mistaken, so if I'm mistaken, people need to correct me. I think the Commerce Rhode Island claims that through their tax credit programs, they've generated about $650 million in investment, in real estate investment. You know how much they've generated in innovation investment? $1.7 million.
That's not so good.
And I won't even have to comment on that.
That's not so good.
But that's that in a nutshell. And those, I believe, are their figures. It's been a while since I looked at them. So are we investing in the right winners and losers? Well, the answer is mixed. Clearly, we're not investing in the right winners. If you look at job quality, are they sustainable and marketable? After we build the apartment house for rich people and hotels for people that can pay $250 or $300 a room a night, what kind of jobs sustain those kinds of activities? A porter, these are all out of work, and so there seems to be a disconnect between the level of investment we're making and not growing jobs, but the quality of jobs that we're growing.
Is there, Brown University came out with something about the economy today. Brookings came out with it 2 years ago. Before that, the governor had another one of these things, these prioritizations, and The Brookings one, I swear to God, Ed Dupree delivered the same exact thing in about 1988. You probably wrote it with Roger Bejan. I think you and Roger Bejan.
No, that was the seminar text. Me and Marcel wrote the
You and Marcel,
yeah.
Right. So, at some point it's about execution. I mean, we can have all the plans in the world, but we've got to really make a commitment, and some of these commitments aren't so easy to really deliver good, significant changes in the economy. They're going to create some significant middle class. And creating $35,000 manufacturing jobs is better than nothing, but it is not a way to create a sustainable, long-term growth economy.
Well, I think there are a couple of things. I think the key thing you mentioned, is leadership. You have to have leadership who is willing to make decisions that don't have an immediate political payback. Because one of the big mistakes governors in all states make is they look at an economic development program and they want to say it did this much in the first 4 years. And my favorite poster child is the Research Triangle down in North Carolina.
Well, Bob Whitcomb wrote about that this weekend, which is functionally an incentive-free zone, but built with a structure that was sustainable.
But it took 30 years to get there. It didn't happen in the first 4. And so there are things that you have to invest in. We have to really talk about education reform. We really got to talk about, I'll use this word to kind of clean up the community college and make it more than, than it is. I think they're trying there, but I don't think they've succeeded. We need to have the guts to invest, more in innovation and less in politically connected real estate deals. We have, and those are the kinds of things that if you do that, there's no guarantee of success. But it's when you talk about reprioritization, it's not a reprioritization of existing programs. It's a reprioritization of the culture of economic development in the state.
Well, Money Man, as always, huge insights. Congratulations on your friendship with the super rich there in the hedge fund industry.
The government has a lot closer relationships with them than I do.
This is an interesting story that's going to play out, this investment in Elliott Management, and we'll have another piece on it tomorrow. I appreciate you taking the time.
I wish we had invested in Manchester United. That's my team.
Right. Is that Glasser, the owner of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
AC Milan have difficulty with Manchester United.
It's interesting. AC Roma is owned by a venture capital guy out of Boston, one of the owners I think he's a Highland Capital guy. All the best Italian soccer teams, I guess, are now owned by venture and hedge funds in Rhode Island. We're going to take a break in 1 minute, and we'll be back with Saul Kaplan, Mr. Innovation. Money Man, thank you so much for coming on the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. We'll be right back.